Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this press briefing to talk about the proposed Ironwood Development project. As most people will know, we had visiting golfing legend Arnold Palmer last week, and while it was originally intended that we would have a press conference to announce the signing of what is essentially an MOU between the government and Ironwood Development with respect to the proposed extension of the East-West Arterial from its junction with Hurst Road to its proposed junction with the North Side Road. That didn't transpire, principally because we didn't get the terms of the MOU completely settled until rather late in the day. And consequently, the press conference, which had been scheduled, was postponed. I know there have been some concerns about that, and to the extent that the government had anything to do with that, I apologize. But we really were working to the last minute to get this agreement sorted. As everyone will know, we have the oversight of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, the Overseas Territories Directorate, in any of these matters these days, and so the time difference sometimes, especially when we're working right down to the wire, makes it much more difficult for us to be able to get things done as swiftly as we would like. So I just wanted to clear the air on that particular point before we started. And so we thought that, notwithstanding the fact that the agreement has been signed now and that Mr. Palmer has left, that we should take the opportunity, Ironwood Development and the government, to talk to the media about what is actually proposed and how we see this project going forward. Well, the government thinks that this proposed project, which consists of private residences, a commercial village, and a hotel centered around a Arnold Palmer designed golf course, is an absolutely amazing opportunity for Cayman. It's estimated at some $360 million and will develop over the course of 20 years. So it's not one of these sort of quick fix type of projects that there's lots of money thrown around for a very short period of time and then it's all over. This is a major project that is proposed to develop over a significantly long period of time. The developers have said that the extension of the East-West Arterial is absolutely critical to the viability of this project. The government is already committed, and I don't mean the progressive government, I mean the government of the Cayman Islands is already committed to the extension of this arterial as part of the arrangement to properly service the Health City project. And so we see the opportunity presented by this particular aspect of this proposed project as really helpful and a great opportunity. Everyone knows government is challenged when it comes to finding the capital to do major infrastructure projects. And what the developer has proposed, we believe, is a good example of how public-private partnerships can work to make sure that Cayman gets the kind of infrastructure that we actually need. As I said, this is all being done with the assistance and the support of Her Excellency the Governor and the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, the Overseas Territories Department. As you know, Mr. Peter Hayes, who's the director of the Overseas Territories Directorate, is here visiting. I had breakfast with him this morning. We talked about this project, among other things. So what was signed on Thursday evening is essentially a memorandum of understanding, setting out in broad terms what we hope the final agreement actually looks like. The MOU is non-binding in nature, and it has to be at this very early stage. But it is a show of good faith on the part of both the government and Ironwood Development about how we see this particular aspect of the project working. The project will have to proceed in accordance with the terms of the Framework for Fiscal Responsibility, which is now enshrined in the Public Management and Finance Law, which sets out a very structured process with respect to any project in which government is going to be involved, where the amounts involved will exceed $10 million. So there'll have to be an outline business case, a strategic business case. There'll have to be an environmental impact assessment, the whole range of requirements which we have outlined before that are necessary with respect to the cruise berthing facility, to the airport redevelopment, to the landfill. It follows that same process. We know that there are concerns, even at a very early stage, about the impact of this road going through a part of the Mastic Trail. Although it's not the original part of the original Mastic Trail, the part that's been developed by the National Trust over the course of many years. And so the environmental impact assessment will have to take that into account and will no doubt propose means of mitigating that and preventing or avoiding addressing the many concerns that people have about that. So none of this is set in stone or even firm about how all of this is going to work. But what is exciting and what is we believe holds great prospects is the fact that we have a major developer in the form of Ironwood Development, now supported by Arnold Palmer and his huge organization, that are determined to develop a major project, which we believe will offer a great deal to Cayman and particularly the eastern districts. And so we have with us Mr. David Moffett on my left, I have Minister Tibbetts on my right, and Ms. Gower, who's the spokesperson for Ironwood, here this morning to be able to answer any questions, any concerns that the media may have. So with those few words, which I hope have been helpful to set the context, I invite questions.
Morning, sir. Just curious to some of the concessions the government is going to be offering as part of the MOU and the signing of the agreement, sir.
Right, thank you. I missed that out in one of the things that is really attractive to us is that this developer has not asked for any concessions that relate directly to their project. The proposal is that any concessions granted with respect to import duty and stamp duty on the sales of land would be applied to the cost of developing the road. At the moment, the estimated cost of the road is about $40 million.
I'd like to ask a few clarifying questions about the environmental issues. I understand in the National Conservation Law, the government is not supposed to sign. I mean, obviously, it's not implemented yet, so I understand that it doesn't really matter from a law point of view. But in a sort of good faith, it does require the National Board the council to be consulted before anything's signed, which would impact the environment. And also, is there consideration about taking the road around the Mastic Reserve? And also, as it's going to be developed and going through, it's also, the road goes through the Blue Iguana Reserve. So are there long-term plans about re-gazetting that road? Because I understand it's only its very first stage in terms of gazette and that it could be changed. Also, what consideration has been given to the impact of such an enormous project right on top of the Botanic Park?
Well, dealing with the last question first, it is a long distance away from the Botanic Park. It's not on top of the Botanic Park at all. In terms of the National Conservation Law, the law is not yet implemented. So there isn't a council set up which could have any consideration with respect to this. But this MOU is, as I said, non-binding in nature. And all of the processes which are required to take place under the law will be followed. Indeed, even without the law, these processes are now required by the FFR. And I think you had one other question, Wendy, which I forgot now.
Mastic Trail.
Or the Mastic. Well, my look at and my knowledge of the area and my look at the plan, I don't think it'll be possible to go around the Mastic Trail, because the Mastic Trail, well, you need to understand historically that the Mastic Trail did not extend as far south as is currently the case. That extension was developed by the National Trust because it just makes good sense. And I'm not devaluing or seeking to devalue that aspect of it. I'm just stating a historical fact. But because it extends so far south, it is almost impossible for any east-west arterial to be diverted around it, because you'd be back, you'd have to go down below where the high school is, which means that you're almost on the whatever they call that road, the road to East End. So it's not going to be possible to divert it around the Mastic Trail, but it may be possible to go over the Mastic Trail by way of a bridge or something. So, but those are issues which will have to be looked at by the environmental
Assessment Board.
Yeah, the Environmental Assessment Board, and we'll see where we get to. I mean, we want to do everything we can, obviously, to improve and enhance the circumstances, not to in any way, make them worse. And the Mastic Trail is a very important National Trust project, and it's very important, we believe, generally. So we are very sensitive to all of that.
We're assuming that the road is going to require some compulsory purchase of land along the route. Can you assure people, for one, that will be dealt with quickly in terms of the negotiation for settlement? I understand there's at least 10 or 20 still outstanding from the road developments in 2006, 2007 that have yet to be paid for their land. So is there anything that you're doing or can do to speed up this process, both for those people and for the people that will have their land acquired as part of the extension?
Well, yeah, any land taken will be taken under the roads law. And so there are a couple of things here. One is that often the reason for the delay is because there are disagreements over what the value of what the compensation should be. And then that has to go through a process, a hearing and so forth. And that delays. People who agree generally get paid far more quickly. But in the case of road acquisition, particularly on a project like this, where what will be the case is the opening up of lands, in most instances we would expect, certainly the interior land would acquire greater value by virtue of the road being in place, and that will probably more than compensate for the land loss.
Well, I mean, that's what was said, I think, on the last occasion, and the Roads Arbitration Council, on the few occasions that it did meet, that it disagreed with that. Those are still going through the process from 7 years back. So if somebody, is there anything you can do at least to ensure the Arbitration Council meets quickly and efficiently, gets these? People don't want to drag on for 7, 8 years to get their money.
Yeah, I suspect that part of the dragging on process in recent times has been about budget issues and government's ability to pay for it. So we are conscious of that, and that's not fair. If there is, in fact, compensation due, the compensation should be paid as quickly as possible. And so we'll have to look at the whole process. But as I said, I know from experience that a lot of it has to do with disagreements, because those of us who sit here as elected members of the government and as members of cabinet don't decide on what the compensation should be or even whether it should be paid. This is done by technical people. And if there are disagreements between the technical people retained by the landowner and the technical people retained by government, we have to go through a process.
Yeah, but do you think that process is working quickly and efficiently enough at the moment?
Well, I think indications are it's taking longer than it should for people to get paid when they're due.
Who's going to be responsible for payment in this case? Is that part of the 40 million cost of the road, or
Yes, that'll be part of the cost of the road.
how about the planning process? Given that government's publicly backing this project, will people still have the opportunity to object in the normal way to planning permission on this?
Government is not exempted from the provisions of the development and planning law.
And I'm talking here about the wider project as opposed to the road.
Well, the project in principle has government's support, but it still has to comply. The developer has to comply with all of the provisions of the various laws that affect it.
You can rest assured the planning process will not be abridged.
Okay, thank you.
Do we know approximately how many people are going to be impacted in terms of their property along this stretch of road? Do we have a ballpark figure of how many people? Do you know?
I don't have an exact figure, but let me say this to you, that for several miles of the road that has to be built, there are single large tracts of land. So the most of the smaller parcels are closer to the beginning of the road from the Newlands area going up. As you go further east, you encounter the much larger parcels. So it's not going to be many parcels affected. And if I may, I don't want to disagree with you, sir, but the way you spoke a while ago, you spoke as if the assessment committee disagreed in large part with Lands and Survey when it came to who should be compensated and who shouldn't. I'm not so sure that that gives the right impression. There may well have been some claims where there was disagreement with the Lands and Survey Department, but it certainly wasn't the majority. I just want to let you know that. I'm not arguing that, but I mean, the way you spoke it, one would get the impression that it was, the scales were tipped towards the majority, and I'm saying that was not the case. But we have to be very careful, because in an instance like this, I understand you, so let's not, that we don't understand. I understand what you're saying, but I don't want for it to sound like it's something that the way the roads law speaks and the decisions that the Lands and Survey Department make, and then if the process moves on, that it's always different from what ends up to be the case. But the fact is that the way the law reads, one has to be mindful of the fact that if, in fact, a property's value is enhanced by the compulsory acquisition and the building of a road, then the law clearly states that there should be no compensation. But in many instances, political pressure is put to bear, and strictly speaking, the word of the law isn't followed. But in the situation that the government is in right now, that will have to be the case. And once decisions are made, then we meaning the government at the time, will have to settle. But I don't know if you're very, very familiar with the process, but there are at least two different methods that are utilized when it comes to settlement. If there is a settlement which is due, there are some people who agree beforehand on a certain amount of settlement, at which point in time some monies are paid out very early in the process, and then when the road is actually built and the survey is done and you get an exact square footage, then whatever the difference is, they get the rest of that settlement. If no one can agree otherwise or beforehand, then it has to go through an assessment committee. Now, I want to say that I agree with you that much of this has taken longer than it should, and as Premier intimated, may have well been budget issues. But I believe moving forward, My view is personally that the earlier that all of that is done and dusted, the less expensive it will be for government rather than making it take longer, because at that point in time, land value, I don't expect will be going down. But I do believe that we would deal with it in a way. I mean, it may well not be a lot of it dealt with in this term, actually. By the time you get, assuming the project goes forward, all goes well, the government, the developers, the UK, everybody's happy, and we move forward with the project, assuming that all of those bridges that have to be crossed are crossed, because there are several of them, then that is very likely 3 to 4 years away. But in principle, I agree with what you're saying that should happen.
So,
Clarifying about the budget issue, you're talking about organising the roads assessment committee as opposed to paying for the land.
No, the budget issue that Premier was talking about and that I reiterated about was simply not having funds in the budget allocated to be able to make the settlements. The Roads Assessment Committee is a committee that should be active at all times. Unfortunately, it requires a magistrate, and there's always legal representation. And in many instances, when people complain, their own legal representation help to extend the time before anything can come, because their calendar is always filled. They can't make this date, it has to be another date, and then it's just one of those things. It's very similar to the Planning Appeals Tribunal, where to get everybody with correct dates that can match up to hold the tribunals. I'm not making excuses, I'm just telling you how it actually works.
so the 40 million that we've talked about, that you said would be going towards concessions, you see that also includes some of the land acquisition money. If you can't tell us how many people you think would be impacted, then ballpark figure the value of the land you think that would be paid out there.
It's not an unfair question, but it's a question that I cannot answer at this point in time, because what has to be determined, first of all, is if it increases the value of the property or if
But
it
you must
diminishes.
have an idea if you can say 40 million it'll cost to build
My
a road.
view, if you're looking for a view, but I know what can happen with a view, but once we make it very clear that it's only a view, I believe the vast majority of the acquisitions will not cause for the government to have to pay. The
So,
vast majority of the actual square footage of acquisition.
so this project is going to have to follow the FFR, and there will be a timeline that obviously that has to take place within. Does that impact the timeline of the developer to get the project rolling out? Because the FFR process can be quite timely, as we know, with all the steps that have to be undertaken. So I'm interested to hear, you mentioned 3 to 4 years.
Premier and Mr. Moffat both will be able to speak to that.
So I'm wondering if that impacts the timeline of the developer.
Yes, first of all, I'd like to say my apologies for Mr. Palmer, and that we had intended to do the press conference at 1 o'clock on Thursday, and that's the reason we were doing that, to have him involved, and he could not be here today. Obviously, went back Friday afternoon, so that was part of the, I think, misunderstanding that the Premier alluded to at the beginning of the statement. So the next time he is back, he would love to have an interview with the press, so he's very excited about being here and being involved in this project. As with every large project, the politics are an important aspect of the project, and the way we have approached this is the personnel, the politics, and the project, the three key components of it, and they've come together at the right timing, we feel, to make this successful. We understand that the FFR and what we have to work inside of, and we've been working diligently with government and successful to this point, I believe, that can get it done. But it is ultimately a project that has to be beneficial to all parties involved, and we understand that. And that's, we have a timeline over a 20-year period. We would like, sooner than later, obviously, to get started, but we understand the perimeters that we have to work inside of.
Because my understanding was that the project was hoped to get started this year. If it has to work within the parameters of the FFR, is that possible?
We have different aspects of the project, and the key component is knowing the road will be there at some date. And that is what we're trying to establish right now and with our agreement that starts this process. What we don't want to do is build a development and not knowing if the road will be there in a year or 10 years from now. So that's kind of I guess the answer to your question is once we have an understanding with government and FCO that this project can proceed, then we're ready to start without the road being there, but knowing it's coming.
Is a non-binding agreement enough?
It's the first step
Of several.
of several. Yeah.
Mr. Robert, thanks so much. Maybe you can explain a little bit more about the project in general. What aspects of your project will come first on the development side as well? When will the golf course eventually be open? That kind of thing, and then we can worry about the road at another time. Obviously, that's what you just said.
This has come. It's been about 4 years from general idea to actually concrete plans. At this stage, what we plan to have is a town center area and then a golf resort that will be signature with Arnold Palmer as our key component. As you well know that Mr. Palmer's name is worldwide, and what we're looking to bring retirees, not only retirees, but mainly retirees from around the world that want to have a second home or a place of retirement. The town center, we've submitted to planning a small strip center. That'll be the first phase of the town center. We have John Doak Architecture is finishing up the drawings for the town center itself. It's about, I believe, about 80,000 square feet. That will go into planning probably in the next 60 days. That will be the anchor component of the development. The golf course, we have not gone to planning, and that's subject to the road being completed as far as the approval stage. We intend to have that kicked off sometime this year and try to be completed toward the end of 2016.
Sorry, Mr. Moffat, could you repeat the size of the square feet? I didn't quite hear you. Did you say?
The town center, we're looking at around 80,000 square feet.
80,000.
We have mixed use between retail and residential in that.
And that's the total, not just the strip center to start.
Yes. Yeah.
80,000
Yeah.
square feet total.
Yeah. This is either a question for Mr. Tibbetts or Mr. McLaughlin. As you know, there are concerns in the Cayman Islands about overdevelopment, and often a lot of people do get concerned about these major projects that are planned and what impact that has on the country. And obviously this is in an area that's very, we've got a lot of pristine environment up there. It's quiet. It's not 7 Mile Beach by any stretch of the imagination. Do you have any concerns about how much of an impact on the infrastructure, on the people of Northside, the people of East End, that this combined with the hospital will have? And do you believe that development is always worth it if, just because a few people object, that doesn't really matter, and it's worth destroying environmental areas, and it's worth doing some, damaging the Mastic Trail or whatever because it's going to bring jobs and all the rest of it? Or, what's your general thoughts about the obvious objections that they're going to be, and can you justify it, essentially?
Well, there's a trade-off for everything. I mean, anything we do is going to have some impact on the environment around us. And what we have to be careful to do is to take into consideration all of the issues and to weigh up the positives against the negatives, and as far as possible seek to mitigate those negatives. I actually believe that this will have a hugely positive impact on the island as a whole. It is going to open up new land, new opportunities in the eastern districts, as has Health City Cayman. It is going to move a significant amount of the economic activity eastward, which is what we need to do. It is going to increase the value of the land, of the people in the eastern districts. All of that, and at this stage, most of the land in the West Bay area, well, certainly 7 Mile Beach area and Georgetown, is not owned by Caymanians. But a lot of the land in the eastern districts still is. And so I really think that it will provide a huge boon for Cayman. And the fact that we have another golf course is absolutely so key to Cayman's tourism industry long term. Anyone who pays attention to these things will know that people who go on golfing vacations want to play 2, 3, or 4 courses. Just having one is not really a draw. It is something to do if you're here for some other reason, but people don't come to Cayman to golf. And I think the opportunities are just immense, and we're just actually being able to start to conceive of what a project like this will actually do long term for Cayman. It's got to be properly planned. We've got to be very careful. I think we are a lot more sensitive generally as a people about the environmental impact of major projects than we were 20, 30 years ago, even 10 years ago. And with the new legislation that we have, with the terms of the FFR, with as I say, with the general sensitivity, increased sensitivity of everyone, I think we're going to wind up with a project which is very, very environmentally friendly. And the truth of the matter is the people who are coming here to live in these places and to play on these courses want a pristine environment. They don't want something that is a concrete jungle and something that has been developed with absolutely no regard to the natural environment around it. So I think we can look forward to something that we will all come to be very proud of in Cayman.
To add to that, some of the plan approvals we were seeking from a year ago, have sat down with the National Trust, and we've actually redesigned our master plan from some of their feedback and comments that they've had, to reroute some of our traffic and some of our building concerns that they had around the Botanic Park area. So we are very sensitive to that issue and look forward to another aspect I know is the Mastic Trail, which is not our, it's more of government from the road standpoint, but I spoke with some of the members of the National Trust and this past weekend, and I think everyone has a vested stake in this project, and we want to include everyone. And I think what I recommended them, that the National Trust members get together and we have a workshop of what the best solution is through the Mastic Trail, and that's the way to head off some of the contention and problems that could be foreseen.
That was actually going to be my question, because the National Trust did put out a statement about it. It did take a stance on the whole matter. So you're saying you're rejigging the plan?
Of our development,
Your development
but
itself.
As far as the road
Is another story.
the road is between. It had to be the 3 stakeholders involved, I think, to sit down and come to an agreement on the road.
So the developers reached out to the National Trust. I guess my question to government is, are you in dialogue with the National Trust as it has taken a stance in this project where the road is concerned?
At present, we have only been dealing with the NRA, and it is certainly our intention to be in dialogue with the National Trust, but we just felt that at this point in time, by way of the road, because of where we were just at the very beginning stage of coming to any agreement and finalizing anything, we hadn't reached out. But certainly long before anything physically takes place, we certainly will, and see how best we can mitigate and get the best possible end result. The final thing I want to add to what Premier and Mr. Moffat has said regarding the project is one of the things that attracts me personally to the project is the fact that there is no 2, 3, or 4 year timeline, which means that the whole world is going to be crazy during that time to get this project finished. It's a project that is estimated to be completed in some 15 to 20 years. So I believe that gives everyone and all the stakeholders much more time to be able to deal with it and make sounder decisions as the project goes forward at its varying stages to make sure that you get the best results.
There was a lot of talk prior to this whole development becoming started about the use of the tires from the dump. Anything new about that aspect of it? And Mr. Moffitt, you also mentioned a residential aspect of the development.
That's the tire man right there.
Well, maybe you're going to answer both questions. Just more the timeline for the residential development as well, please.
The residential component, we have 2 subdivisions that have been received planning approval already. I think that was 2007 or 2008. Our focus is to get the commercial phase started. Our residential would probably not kick in until, I would say, 2015. But we do have overall the mixed use of single family to multifamily of complete around 1,800 units with the residential. And tires. They're great. Yes, somebody had to ask. No, someone had mentioned to me about the tire was going out to tender, tire issue, and of course the fire that happened there before the holidays. And I had met someone previously that had done some research on tire chipping. I know the cost that when the tender went out, it is expensive. It's a cost to get rid of, no matter if it's in Cayman or anywhere else in the world. And we were going to put in on a tender, and then when we saw that it had to be taken off island and paid to government, we withdrew. We have a professor, doctor that we've consulted with and has become our consultant out of University of Wisconsin that has done a great deal of research with tire chippings. And he is on board as one of our team members that has actually have done studies and done the testing to prove that the rubber chips actually take the nutrients out of the chemicals, so that you have less fertilizer going back into the water if you're using the tires as a drainage factor. Our goal is to reach an agreement with the government where we would be able to use the tires in the golf course development and therefore not have to ship them off the island. But also, at the completion of that, the equipment would be either turned over to government or someone that would be doing the recycling, where there'd be a tire shredder on the island for future tires that would never have to have a stockpile of tires again. So that we've waited on going back since it's supposed to go back out to tender, but we haven't. But our intent is to actually end up with the tires.
Well, that was going to be my question, because we knew about that before, but now that RFP is over, have you been in contact with Department of Environmental Health and the minister responsible, Osborne Borden, and how fast is that going to move along? If you have any idea, that's more of a government question, quite honestly.
We were waiting for this step to happen, to have this stage agreement signed, because ultimately, if the golf course isn't built because the road's not built, then we can't take the tires. So that's kind of we're all in this together, is the way I see it. And I think that the tire issue is very solvable. So we look forward to having an agreement on that in the next several months.
But like the rest of it, it's all dependent on how everything else falls into place, where the chips fall, quite frankly, right?
All pieces have to align together.
Just government's version, what do you think? Is this a good idea? Would you amend the RFP to allow this to take place and keep the tires on?
The RFP finished. A new RFP. I mean, I guess the question is, when would the new RFP go out? And
Soon.
And you'd be okay with switching the RFP so that the tires stay on island?
Well, the RFP that we put out, there were no takers. So obviously we have to make some changes.
Just to give a quick correction, I am being chastised by technical staff that I am a week late in my update. The NRA has been in contact with the National Trust, so there is dialogue continuing along those lines. It's no longer premature.
Mr. Moffitt, if you get the tires, if you're not going to build the golf course, you say, or start work on the golf course until after the road has begun, where are you going to keep the tires?
Our agreement will be subject to taking the tires and using them. So the agreement that we've reached with the government will be subject to that condition.
Okay. So you don't know where you're going to keep them yet.
No, that they would be. The intent would be they would be shredded on site and taken to the course and used.
So if you get the tires, you'll be leaving them at the dump for a year or so.
I can't say that how long the timeline would be. It depends on what the FCO agrees to and what our final agreement is. So, like
But in
Tammy
other words,
said,
it will
like
be
Tammy
there
said
until-
earlier, it's that part's not in my court.
Bearing in mind that that's still a much more hopeful situation than sending out an RFP with no takers.
Do we have any more questions on
It's
the
that
Ironwood
witching
development?
hour. It's 12 o'clock.
Yeah. I will be the one then. On Friday, we saw some interesting developments within the Legislative Assembly. There's a lot of questions surrounding the stability. I don't know if stability is quite the right word there, but what is happening within government? So I put it to you right now. What is the strength of the government right now after watching two government people vote against party lines, the speaker having to step in and break a tie, something you don't normally see happen? I leave it to you.
Well, I'll be the first to say, Friday was not the government's finest hour. But what transpired on Friday had nothing to do with the stability of the government. I think it is a clear indication of how controversial this whole issue of electoral reform actually is. And I should go on record and say that we have worked very hard at this issue for many months. We held a 2-day retreat. And I came away from it, and I think most people came away from it believing we had reached a compromise which all members of the government team, all 13, including the speaker, could actually back. As I've said before, I don't lead a progressive administration. I lead an administration in which the progressives have the majority. But there are 13 members of the team. I could not form a government with just the 9 that were elected. And so while those who have strong views about this issue will say that the progressives have wavered from their manifesto promise, et cetera, I've been around long enough to know that I have to keep a government together. I have been in office not quite 14 years, and I've seen the demise of 2 governments during their term. I've been part of one of those, and I moved the no confidence motion with respect to the second one. So I am very, very conscious of how easy it is for a government to fall apart because people take dogmatic views about something. So I have striven from the very start to reach consensus on issues, on all issues. It's not always possible, but I try, and I try really hard. It is one thing if I have one member who says they don't agree, or 2 members that say they don't agree. But when I start to get serious disagreement on fundamental issues from significant number of members of my team, I have to take that into account. So we went to the Legislative Assembly, not only after having had a 2-day retreat, but also after caucus on Monday, before the House met on Wednesday. I certainly was of the view that all members of the team were still supporting the position that we'd taken, which is that we supported single-member constituencies, but that we wish to adopt a system similar to that which has been adopted in the Turks and Caicos Islands and in the British Virgin Islands, where you have the majority of seats as single-member constituency seats, and then you have a number of at-large constituencies. And so it was a surprise, really, for me when members of my team, some members of my team, felt that they had to support the single-member constituency motion, which had been brought by the members from East End and North Side. So that is a surprise. The other bit, though, which I think has caused people to think that there may be some difference of view in cabinet, is actually really a function of a few things. Some political naivety and some of my team being rookies in that respect, not understanding how this game is played, and really the actions of a wily old campaigner like Arden McLean, who looked up and saw that 4 of the seats at the government front bench were empty, and sat down in the middle of what he was saying, so that we were caught literally
And the vote will be taken.
short. And so this was a combination of things, but the result was not a consequence of any instability in the government. As I said, it clearly we have issues about this whole the whole single member constituency point, and of course I've been the whipping boy, but most of my career I've been the whipping boy, so I'm not unused to that for this. But I needed to make it very plain that if my team wants pure single member constituencies, then it'll be pure single member constituencies. I certainly would not have stood up in the House and put forward the government's position had I been of the view that this was not the position of the team. And it is still the position of the vast majority of the team. The concerns about the size of constituencies is real. It is so real that they dealt with it this way in the Turks and Caicos Islands. They dealt with it this way in the British Virgin Islands. Because if you wind up with constituencies that are so small that persons can get elected on the basis of 250 or 300 votes, it becomes very easy to wrongly influence the outcome of an election. There are a few things that I can claim to be an expert on or to really know, but I can tell you this much. I understand Georgetown politics. I have spent 6 campaigns in Georgetown politics, 2 as a stalwart supporter and committee member for my good friend on the right, Minister Tibbetts, and the other 4 in which I have been intimately involved. I know every nook and cranny, every road, every street in the District of Georgetown. There is no part of it I have not been, and I don't know the people. And I can tell you, hand on heart, if we divide Georgetown into such small constituencies where it is possible to be elected on the basis of 250 or 300 votes, we are going to have some bizarre results. Areas which are vulnerable because of their social economic makeup are really, really worrying. And so let's do the numbers. There were 18,600 roughly voters in the last election. If we make a special case for East End, which is what we're being asked to do, and a special case for Northside, which we're being asked to do, and a special case for Cayman, Bracken, Little Cayman, which we're being asked to do, to honor their historical district boundaries and cultural differences. When I say make differences, I'm talking about in terms of numbers, so that their numbers are significantly below what the average would be. We wind up then with about 16,000 voters left. You divide that then by, if we stick to 18 seats, you divide that then by 15. Or if you go to 19, you divide it by 16. And look at the numbers of voters that you have in each constituency. And then you bear in mind that the 2 dominant parties are bound to field candidates. And there are likely to be a number of independents who run. And you will understand very quickly, with constituencies of around 800 or 900 persons, how someone can get elected on the basis of 250 or 300 votes. The reason why they went to a combination in the Turks and Caicos Islands, where they are, and I went and got this because I knew you were going to ask me this question, their there are 10 single-member constituencies and 5 at-large constituencies in a population of less than 48,000 people. I don't know how many registered voters they have because I haven't drilled down that far. And the reason why they did that in the British Virgin Islands, where there are 9 single-member constituencies and 5 at-large constituencies, is the reason is twofold. One, it is to increase the size of or to avoid reducing the size of the constituencies, so that in their cases, the constituencies, the electorate is divided into 9 or 10 as opposed to 15 or 13. So the boundaries get further apart, the number of constituents get larger in number. But it is also to mitigate the inevitable parochialism, parochial approach to politics, which is an inherent part of politics in a system where constituencies are so small. Persons who are elected on a national level by everyone bear no particular allegiance to a small constituency and are therefore much more likely to be able to approach national issues with a broader perspective, one which is unaffected by parochial considerations. And so a significant number of my team, while every single member of the team is committed to what I've called equality of franchise, that is that each voter should have the same weight in the ballot box. A significant number of my team are worried about dividing Cayman into such small constituencies. This proposal would, we believe, carry through on our determination that the present system, which we regard as unjust, is fixed, so that the voter in East End and Northside has the same weight with respect to the makeup of the government as does the voter in Georgetown and West Bay. But would avoid, as I say, making these constituencies so small that what we wind up with is the possibility of very bizarre results and a really parochial approach to the national politics, driven by considerations which relate to very small constituencies rather than to the broad national issues. Now, that's a long speech, but I hope I've explained why we are where we are.
Mr. McLaughlin, can I just ask you to clarify whether you'd be willing to say exactly how many and who of your team don't support single-member constituencies, one man, one vote, as laid out in the referendum? Because there is, I suppose, rumour, speculation that in actual fact the person leading this is you.
Well, I lead the party, but I don't know how one could be the majority of 13. Every member of my team supports single-member constituencies, and every one of us support the concept of equality of franchise.
The move of the motion.
Sorry, I didn't hear an answer. I said, would you be willing to say how many don't support the original position and that are asking for these at-large candidates? Would you be willing to say how many want these at-large candidates?
But Wendy, the problem with your question is that 4 members of my team were not elected on the basis of the Progressive Manifesto. You can't blur the lines that way. I was at pains to set out that I have a government of 13, which is made up of 9 progressive members and 4 who never ran on our manifesto.
However, there were 2 of those members were fully supportive of your moving.
I can't speak to that, and I'm not going to speculate. And I'm.
You're saying that it's the 4. It's
No, I'm not saying that, Wendy, at all. I've said what I've said.
I suppose because the move of the motion said that you tried to cut a deal with him, would you like to speak to that? Was he speaking the truth, or was that not the truth?
Tammy, you know, I've thought about this for a long time, and all I want to say is that I am not going to get into all of that. Arden left the party. He did not leave the party over single-member constituencies. He left the party over the leadership of the party, plain and simple. And there is nothing to be gained except lots of talk at me trying to answer Arden's allegations about this, which are colored by his perception of events at the time. I don't think that serves him, me, or the government, or the country any good. And I'm not going there.
And the strength of the team at this point in time?
The team is as strong as it ever was. There's an issue over one particular matter, which is the one that we dealt with, and obviously we have to work that through. But I have no indication that any of my members want to go join the UDP or the two independents in the southeast corner.
So at this point in time, sir, if I might ask you this question, what is the likelihood of the equality of franchise in voting for the next election at this point in time?
Well, what I can say is this. Unless we are able to reach some consensus within the House on electoral reform, it's not going to happen. Because I cannot drive through or attempt to drive through a particular position which does not have the support of the majority of my team. As I said, you know, people become very single-minded about issues. But I and the government have a country to run. For the average person, right now, electoral reform is not their first thought in their mind. I know because I know my constituents and because I live among them. It is an important issue for the country overall about how it is governed. So I'm not trying to belittle that, but I am saying I have to be careful and the government has to be careful not to let one issue like this create such problems, such division, that I do wind up with what my detractors would love, a government that is so weak that we can't get anything done. I fully understand that the objective of those in the southeast corner and the opposition, it is their role to try to take the government down. And people ought not to misunderstand that. They would love to see Alden toppled as premier. They would love to see the government in shambles so that they can take over. That's how oppositions are. I've been in opposition a long time. So no one need dress this up for anything but what it really is, which is a full frontal assault on the government, because we've been so solid, we've been so good on just about every other issue, and here is something that they correctly have identified as a possible Achilles heel. So, you know, I and my colleague to my right and some of us older soldiers in this army, you know, just have to settle the team down and say, listen, the government took a beating last Friday. We made a mess of things. But that is one issue. We have a country to run and a mandate which extends for another 3 years and 3 months. Let's get on with running the country, doing the job we've been elected to do.
And settling the differences where they exist, if you don't mind.
That's perfect.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming. Hope that's been helpful.